Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Foreign Policy Editor-in-Chief, Ravi Agrawal.
All right, hello everyone. Hi everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That's better, thank you. And this is being live streamed globally, so also good day, good afternoon, good evening to everyone wherever you are around the world. Listen, this is now day 4 of the high-level week of UNGA. It is also, I don't know, day 20, if you look at it from a different perspective. So thank you for being here. I'm just really pleased and glad that we have such a great showing in this room. So much of the stuff we all talk about and discuss can be hard, it can be depressing, and truly, when I look around this room and I see who's in this room, I feel a real sense of hope and strength. So thank you for being here. Let's just have a round of applause for yourselves. So, hey, I'm Ravi Agrawal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, and we're here today for a public briefing that is titled Foundations of the Future, New Frameworks for Justice, Accountability, and Multilateral Cooperation. We've got some fantastic sessions that are coming up, and broadly, the theme that we're going to dig at in each of them is the fact that all of these meetings we're having here this week and this month are taking place against the growing backdrop of growing authoritarianism and inequity. And at the same time, civic space is narrowing in societies across the globe. Amid that, the values of openness and accountability in government are under strain. Now, this isn't just about depressing you. What I want to push us towards today here is solutions. And there are many, and there are areas of hope. There are grassroots movements and local leaders who are showing that inclusive participation and fair governance are not just essential, but they actually work in communities and countries around the world. We're going to hear those stories, and we're going to figure out lessons that we can all learn and apply them in different domains. I have a few housekeeping notes, so let's just get that out of the way. There's a QR code on your seat that will take you to the agenda and speaker bios for all of the wonderful speakers we'll have coming up here. I'm told you can submit some questions there for our panelists, or also on the live stream page if you're coming to us virtually. I have to say, I'm just looking at my notes, but I would have said this anyway. There's also a discount code on. I'm nothing if not a salesman. The discount code is for a subscription to Foreign Policy. All of the things we're talking about, all of the domains that are challenged, journalism is challenged too. I know many of you personally, I know many of you are subscribers. But if you are not, if a discount helps you over the line, please do use the discount code on there. And then lastly, we also have a special daily newsletter around this week. It's called Situation Report. Our reporters Rishi Iyengar and John Haltiwanger, who should be around here somewhere, do say hi if you run into them, but they're documenting a lot of the biggest trends and stories from this week. Lastly, why are we here? For the topics I mentioned, but also because we're partnering with Open Society Foundations for this event. All of you know the amazing work that they do in extremely challenging circumstances. So let's have another round of applause just to thank them for the amazing work that they do. And with that, let's get started. I think there'll be a voice of God. There you go.
Please welcome to the stage Open Society Foundation's President, Binayfer Naoroji.
All right, Binayfer, it is wonderful to see you.
Thanks, and it's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience.
I know, I see them too.
Thanks for partying hard last night and then waking up early to come. It's much appreciated.
So we're here to talk about reimagining rights and equity and justice in a fractured world. At least that's how the session is titled. That thing, the fractured world element of this session, just give us a sense of how you see the world from your perch at OSF.
Okay, so first of all, it really feels like we're in a fragile global moment, that the world is just sort of falling apart in so many ways. And by default, in terms of where we are with climate, with inequality, etc., but also that it's actively being dismantled by the very powers that presided over the world, the rules-based order that we've been living with since the Second World War. And it just feels like it's a more dangerous world. It's a more fragile world, and we are seeing atrocities being committed with an impunity that it's not new, but really a sense of attack against some of the institutions of justice globally. So it's a moment where a lot of things it's a perfect storm where a lot of things are coming together in a way that's taking us backwards. But at the same time, what I want to also say is that it's a dangerous time for the world, but it's actually also an opportunity. And as I travel around the world and as I meet people, and many of these people who are in the audience today, I actually see people who really have a determination to keep working together for our shared humanity and actually do things. And I want to talk a little bit today about some of the optimism that I feel, but it's really, it's a moment where the widening inequality, the fact that democracies are devouring themselves, and we're seeing authoritarianism coming in through the ballot box. So, you know, that's a kind of new and puzzling phenomenon. And the growing inequality actually adding to exclusion of people and people dropping off the map. So these are, you know, not good things. And so the efforts that we have to do is to look for the spaces where there's light, where there's hope, and actually start building a new future for us. We can't just let it dissolve without actually having something emerge.
So what are those spaces? And I'm going to overlay two more problems onto the ones you did. There's a general sense, not just because of inequality, but there's a general sense that the systems don't work. And there's also a sense that we can't agree on the truth anymore. We can't agree on facts. And, you know, in the space I operate in journalism, I mean, that just strikes me as the most dangerous thing when basic facts are being called into question, and then the debates you have are not, you know, on the margins. They're about right and wrong, truth and falsehoods. When you overlay those problems onto the ones you've described, you know, given the sort of grant-making ability of OSF, given the bigger picture view that you have, where are the opportunities?
Okay, so first of all, there is such a thing as the truth.
Thank you.
And you do see it in terms of spaces where things are happening. So the first thing is open society has always functioned with the ethos that affected communities are best placed to make decisions about their futures, that place people in places or communities that are excluded know and hold the wisdom of how they can actually strengthen themselves if they are given the opportunities. And that's how we work. And so we start on the ground with communities, frontline communities that are actually working on issues, and their wisdom and the way they see the world actually builds up transnationally to give an inflection into the global positions that we can take. And what happens then when we do it that way is you see people organizing in ways that actually build an international movement that is informed by their reality. So it's actually not from the top down. I think the International Tax Convention work addressing inequality is an example of that, where it's local groups that have come together to work on things. The climate communities, you see the different ways that people are organizing. I think that we also have to recognize that the old ways of organizing are not going to be able to get us to where we need to be. And if we only think about reform and shoring up failing institutions, we're not going to get to where we need to be. It is a moment for reimagination.
Can you say a bit more about that? What do you mean by the old forms of organizing?
So in the world of grant making, basically, in part because of tax laws and other laws, we've built a whole structure, and it's carried us well up to this point, of non-governmental organizations registered in a place, a number of whom get foreign funding and have built up structures. Now we see governments putting into place restrictions on the NGO structure. We see restrictions on foreign funding. And we see different types of organizing. And I'll give you an example of the way younger people are organizing now is not the way we did before. So in the Nepals and Senegals and Kenyas and, you see younger people organizing in a leaderless kind of structure. They don't register an NGO and get started. They actually are organizing in the social media space. They are building structures that actually are very strong, and they're organizing in ways that don't look like we did. And as a result, as a philanthropy, it's also a new way of address. How do we help support this different type of organizing in a structure that doesn't actually allow us to move money in that way? And also the recognition that money is also not what's needed a lot of times, that actually giving a small group too much money can drown it, or a leaderless group of young people who are organizing, actually it's not money they need, it's skill sets, it's exposure, it's connection, and how can we make sure that what they need is what we are providing? So looking at new ways to do philanthropy that are actually not doing. And as I say that, it doesn't mean that everything is changed, because I'll give you an example. In Kenya, when young people in the Gen Z generation organized to protest against a finance bill that would have created hardship for the poorest sector of the country, essentially they were met with disproportionate use of force by the police, and they were shot, they were villainized, they were brought into court. And then the ecosystem, the human rights ecosystem of having legal aid groups that could help represent them in court, medical groups that could assist them, international groups that could document what happened to them. So our old ecosystems are still useful, they still have value, but we have to make sure that we're also responding to the new challenges of what's needed in this moment.
And it strikes me, as nationalism becomes a force in more and more countries around the world, this model that you're describing of kind of an insider-outsider model, where you're not talking down, you're not bringing in a vision off the shelf, but you're listening and you're empowering local groups. When I look around the world and I see so many different Gen Z movements in countries that are protesting, I mean, think of Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Nepal. They don't always work out in the right way. And some of that is because it's hard. They're battling so many different forces.
And I think in any of those societies where there's disruption, it's a fragile moment. And I think Sudan is the example of when young people come out strongly, but then a vacuum, political vacuum is created, and the wrong actors step in. And now we have a civil war situation. But in other places, again, where the stars align right, I mean, we met just yesterday with Muhammad Yunus from Bangladesh, who's carried the country through that interim period into an upcoming election that will hopefully hand it back into a standing government. But that government was toppled, the previous government was toppled through peaceful protests by young people. So it's about also making sure that we're shoring up these efforts when you have political vacuums created.
I feel like so much of this can be, there's so many markers, and it's always like a few steps forward, one step back. There's so many different forces that can muddy the waters, new challenges that emerge. When you support various organizations around the world, how do you track progress? What are the markers that you're looking for?
So first of all, you have to recognize this field of work has no finish line.
Yeah.
You don't get a democracy and secure it, and I think that's the lesson we're learning. So I think when you understand that we're not, you don't finish and move on. We have to always be vigilant. We have to always ensure that we're active civic participants, both locally in our own nations and globally as in terms of taking care of others. The other thing also is human rights struggles, they're not linear. they take time, and there's one step forward, one step back. It weaves and winds, and you have to just stay the course in terms of making sure that the values that we would like to see in this world we continually bring. And I think that what we are seeing in the United States, for instance, really is the assumption that democracy is secured. I think it's a good reminder here that you can't be complacent, and you do need, as citizens, to be active and be civic members all the time.
This week, it's so clear that countries are just very polarized, whether it's on Russia and Ukraine or on Gaza or a range of other issues. When you look at that geopolitical polarization, how does that overlay into the various work that you do around the world? And, there are all these allegations of double standards on the part of countries and organizations. How do you navigate that kind of a scenario?
So I think that's always been part of international relations. There's always been the hypocrisy. There's always been. So it's not something new. But what I would say is that, we're no longer living in a unipolar world. We're not even living in a G7 world anymore. I mean, you see the G20 coming forward. You see BRICS organizing. You see nations organizing themselves in different ways. And actually what I'm seeing is really the calls for a more inclusive and just world are really coming from surprising places. And a lot of it is within the Global South. We are seeing Global South countries that really were members of an international structure that they had not been part of. A lot of, after the Second War, a lot of these countries were still in colonialism or just coming out. And I see actually strong voices for a rules-based order coming from, Ramaphosa, Lula, countries that previously didn't have they don't have a permanent seat on the Security Council. I'm so encouraged by Mexico and female leadership bringing in a new, different way of showing what empathetic leadership can be. So and still progressing. So there's lots of different things. This is the first time in history that more women will be graduating from university than men.
Wow.
And I think you just give these women another 10 years, and I think we're going to see a really amazing world kind of emerging as women take their seat at the table in a much more equitable way. And same with young people. So what we're seeing is different groups that previously did not have access to power are going to have the skill set to actually take their seat at the table, and they're going to lead us into a different future.
I love how you're describing this idea of defenders of rules emerging from different parts of the world. And it doesn't just have to be from here. But, rules aren't even new. Like, we think of rules as just being invented in the last 80 years. But, many of the rules we think of as new are actually very old, such as, thou shalt not attack your neighbor.
Yes.
How do you defend these rules? In a world in which there's so much impunity? And again, from your vantage point, what are the areas that you can back and push to make sure that the rules that we do have are followed?
So I think we have to agree that the disruption that brought the rules-based order after the Second World War really was a factor of the Second World War, of the two world wars, that moved us and moved the world. And there were courageous and creative thinkers that set up the Bretton Woods institutions or the United Nations. And that's what we should be looking for now. Where is the moral imagination right now in this space we find ourselves, which is a different world, to make sure that we're building something that can take us for the next 50 years? And, I think that, it's very easy to say, oh, the US has failed multilateralism. I actually think that, multilateralism at this point now is not fit for purpose in this world. And it's not a single country. I think what we've seen is the idea of free, unfettered markets is not led to more equality. What we're seeing is the shrinking of the role of the state, and the idea of the marketplace of ideas and less government actually can't take us into the future in a world where climate change requires strong governments, where reducing inequality requires the role of a state. And I think that, we had systems that have ignored inequality and now we see such wide inequality, it's not sustainable. And we also just see countries struggling under so much debt. 3.3 billion people live in countries where the amount the government is paying to service their debt is more than the government pays on health or education. So the futures for those countries are actually doomed. There's no way they can dig themselves out unless we find a different way, a new international economic architecture that can actually sustain itself. And what's happening with this wide inequality is it's actually impacting in the distrust on democracy and democratic practice. There's a sense that democratic practice is not leading to better lives for people. And so you see democracies devouring themselves in a bid to try and address this. So it's a multi-pronged crisis, but this disruption is the moment that if we take advantage of it and have really courageous leaders who have a moral imagination, will come with something new. You know, it doesn't have to also just be static.
I love that. What are the areas of opportunity that you're seeing in this crisis? Areas where things can actually be set up to be better than they were, rather than just reverting to some sort of norm that we imagine?
So I think what we should be looking for is a more inclusive and sustainable multilateralism. And we have leaders right now in the world who are thinking about that. And we're seeing them organizing in different ways. I mentioned BRICS. But for instance, we are seeing, CELAC, the Latin Americans, CARICOM, Caribbeans, African Union, actually making a band to connect and think about ways to build alternate ways of trading, of thinking about what kind of world they want to see, because most of the population and most of the younger populations are now sitting in the global south. And that's, again, where the future and the energy will lie. And so, for instance, I think that this is a pivotal year for dealing with financing for development, for debt, for trade rules and changing those. Last year was the big year of elections all around the world, and some went well and some didn't. But how do we ensure that we've got civic engagement in different places? I think that to me, when I see younger people and the way they're organizing, I actually feel quite encouraged. And they're really, with just very peacefully, they're actually pushing repressive governments out of power. It's quite incredible. And then the question is, how do we support them?
That's going to be the question for the next few years, I agree. Benaifer, thank you so much for this and for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Now, please welcome International Crisis Group President and CEO, Dr. Comfort Ero. The Reckoning Project CEO and Executive Director, Janine Di Giovanni, and Open Society Foundation's Managing Director of Programs, Isander El Amrani.
Okay, I'm back. And we have an amazing panel here. I think their names were just called out, but very quickly: Comfort Ero, Janine Di Giovanni, Isander El Amrani. It's great to have you all here. We're going to pick up on what we were just discussing, especially the idea of the rules. The rules-based order.
Underline it.
What rules, and how do you defend them? Comfort, let me start with you there, given the work you do at Crisis Group. First of all, do rules matter right now? I mean, do you get a sense that the world is caring about the rules that exist?
Several parallel universes is the best way of saying it, yeah. And you sort of answered one of the questions, rules, what rules? You know, and also I think we all know that the rule makers have always been the rule breakers as well.
Yeah.
And they always bend it to their will as well. And, you know, when it suits them, when it's necessary and it serves their particular interest, for example, the UN, when it serves them to park it at the door of the UN, they will do that. When it serves them not to operate within the multilateral rules structure, they will work outside of it. That is statecraft 101. It's always been like that, and states have clear self-interest. And I would say this for any state, not just a particular Western kind of state. Every region has its own sets of rules, understanding, because this is power politics. This is power at its rawest as well.
So I'm with you on all of that, but if something about this moment feels new or different, what is that?
The guardrails are off. The rules or let's talk not about rules, but international law. That is being breached at will, and I think that is what is different. The rules, I think it's important not to talk about the rules because these are very different. But the laws are enshrined and they were defined, and I'm looking directly at Ken Roth here, the doyen of some of all of this thinking. These rules were sacred principles that shaped a world that came out of the Second World War, and they continue to shape international relations and the society of states, even in the post-war era. And there was always understanding that these were the guardians, these were the things that helped, that held states together as well. And those are being eaten at, torn at, and that is what is very different, which is why I talk less about rules, because they're sort of a lower tier, but more about the idea that as we're talking now, we repeat never again, and we know that international humanitarian law is being torn to shreds. We know that the Geneva Conventions are being grabbed at and undermined as well. We know that the rules of states that bind states together, these are being smashed up as well. So those codified conventions, treaties, laws, this is what I think should worry us. That there's an understanding among states, and those understandings, we understand that those are, we use them whenever we want, but the rules, but the law is what I think is matters, and that's what should worry us less about the rules, because those are shaped by the West. But there's an understanding that these are treaties within the United Nations, and the Charter of We the Peoples is where it starts, and those first principles are being undermined today.
Janine, you see that every day in the work that you do.
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm the director of the Reckoning Project. We're a war crimes unit that operates in Ukraine, Gaza on a very small basis, and opening in Darfur. So basically, what we're seeing is on every level. First of all, as Comfort said, the breakdown of the laws of war. So the attacks on civilians, which are at an unprecedented rate. But also the attacks, let's look at Gaza. More than 250 journalists have been killed, largely targeted. More than 600 healthcare workers. The Commission on Inquiry, the report last week, which said that it was Israel's genocidal intent, focused on the 13 aid workers who had been killed. So, I mean, we're living in a time where this is normalized. And if this happens, the system is just completely going to unravel. So, but there is one thing that, and this is following from your last panel, I do feel hopeful in the sense that now more than ever, it's a time for civil society, for journalists, and for others that are in this field to come together in solidarity. Because it's all we have right now, basically, against these kind of dark passions and dark forces which are dominating. We have the latest news that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is sanctioned as an institution. So those of us that work with the ICC need to find new ways to protect ourselves, but keep doing the work. At the Reckoning Project, our main thing is to focus on the rights of the victims and to make sure that they have access to justice. And this really, it's very personal for me because before I did this, I was a journalist for 3 decades operating in war zones, 18 war zones. And I saw too often the bad guys just disappear completely after the wars because it took too long to get to the victims, to get the testimonies, to open the doors to international justice mechanisms. So we decided to try to hasten that, in a sense, to make it more accessible to those who had suffered these unbelievably atrocious crimes. So I think there is avenues and pathways that we could look at in terms of justice. There's universal jurisdiction. There's relying on more submissions. There's relying on more advocacy. There's using the media, people like you that could work more directly with civil society. And there's countering disinformation. I mean, for us, that is our greatest working against the Kremlin machine, which is massive. And I mean, I'll just end by saying we could have like small victories. We work and we have worked for the past nearly 4 years on the 19,000 stolen Ukrainian kids who were taken from Ukraine and brought to Russia, indoctrinated, basically became Russian citizens. And, you know, working on that with governments, we work directly with the Office of the Prosecutor General in Ukraine. That's never happened before, where civil society works directly like that. We've been able to bring some of those kids home to try to change policy and to work directly to get Putin's arrest warrant at The Hague. So I am despondent, like everyone, but I also see great avenues for allegiance and allies, and that's what we're working towards.
I love that. Isander, build on that for us, please, as we push towards solutions, not just the problems. Janine mentioned solidarity, of course, ending impunity. How do you boost those forces, and what other ways of combating all of these forces that we've been discussing now today? How do you do that?
Yeah. Look, I think in this moment there's a tension between being conservative, wanting to preserve an order that has a lot of good things about it, and really the need for new ideas and new leadership. You know, it's not the security question is a particularly vexing one because the revisionist orders powers are very powerful states. So it blocks things at the Security Council, it blocks things elsewhere. But there's a lot of other areas where we're seeing other countries show leadership. And I think what's really important is where we face obstacles is to show that solidarity, so that we have that solidarity, for instance, with organizations that, for instance, from Palestine, that have been working with the ICC and now find themselves sanctioned, so that we find innovative ways to counter, as Janine just said, that work with the ICC, you know, how we can work with the ICC and human rights defenders, to find ways to get around all the repressive measures being put out by states in various shapes, whether it's what Benaifer mentioned in the earlier panel about NGO funding laws. You know, we do need to, you know, we can't just be despondent. We do need to kind of like think hard and think of how we implement things differently. And there's a reality also that we need state power behind this. That's how things are going to happen. Civil society is a fundamental part of it. The agenda needs to be informed not by an elite agenda, but by, you know, it has to have popular support. That's an important, I think, factor of legitimacy for any new rules we want to make. But there's so many areas other than security where, you know, whether it's trade, whether it's economics, whether it's things like deep sea, AI, space, where we do need rules. We are at a moment that's also a moment of massive technological change, and we need to anticipate that. And I see a lot of countries show an interest in that and who don't want the agenda.
Give us a couple of examples.
Well, for instance, you know, we see countries like Taiwan have a real interest in that for obvious reasons. In those questions, sorry?
It's about security as well.
It's about security as well, but they have an interest in setting the agenda. We saw, you know, Benaifer mentioned the leadership that Lula in Brazil, South Africa has shown on justice issues. We see, I think, in Southeast Asia. I was there about a month ago. I think governments really thinking hard about not being sandwiched on tech issues between, you know, the agenda of the US and that of China. There is, I think, an opportunity to use in this new multilateralism that we want to create, the desire for sovereignty and for autonomy that a lot of countries have. They don't want to be to return to a Cold War type of divided. You're either with this camp or with that camp, you have zero autonomy.
Yeah. Janine, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just want to say something about the financial, the protecting the financial, that justice can't just be in the courts. It has to be around the financial sector as well. And I'm thinking in particular of oligarchs and the use of sanctions. And one thing that also does give me hope is compared to how we worked in the 1990s, investigating war crimes. And largely thanks to Ken and Human Rights Watch and Bellingcat and these amazing organizations, we now have, incredible OSINT tools at our disposal, which really can help then pinpoint individuals and use that to help work towards sanctions. So again, I mean, it's just not, justice isn't just the courts. We can use other means with the ICC blocked for the moment, or those of us who are worried about our future and what will happen, we can use other means.
So some of this is kind of the naming and shaming and the power of that. But again, I mean, in a world where there's so much naming and shaming in different directions, it kind of muddies the waters, right? Like, how do you then, if you're correct in what you're doing there, how do you make it stand out?
We need more than statements and outrage right now. I mean, it's sanctions, and especially I'm thinking of Israel and Gaza. I mean, we need much more powerful work that's going to be done rather than everyone's outraged, and everyone's making powerful statements. But it has to go deeper than that. And I think that's where the grassroots level of NGOs working towards whether it's, getting sanctions against certain individuals or against groups can be really effective.
Comfort, build on that, because, I mean, this week, obviously, there have been, I think, 10-plus countries that have recognized the state of Palestine. Again, keeping in mind that the vast majority of the world had already done so. But when you look at moves like that, do you think that moves the needle on any of these sort of core principles we're discussing? And if not, how do you push for them?
I was walking back from an event late on Monday, and one of the foreign ministers from the frontline states that were campaigning for the end of apartheid said that she felt that this felt like the moment where that she was trying to compare it to the lead up to where apartheid was finally done for, what it took was that a number of states finally acknowledged the reality that was going on the ground, and it mattered which states they were, and that tilted things in South Africa's in the apartheid struggle favour as well. I don't know if we're at that moment yet, and also one of the big powers, the outlying power that still needs to make that call is still largely is squarely in Israel's camp.
Yeah.
But it does matter that certain European states, not just any European state, but certain powerful key European states are beginning to shift, and because the pressure is coming from within their societies. It does matter, and I think to go back to your point about what's different, certainly what's different also for Crisis Group also is that it's very clear to me also that paying attention to the tensions within societies that you're trying to influence does matter. We know that what shifted things in the UK politics this week was not some moral sort of reckoning within a leader's mind, but because of electoral realities as well. So I recognition is one thing, and I'm not going to condemn the recognition.
Yeah.
I do worry about what it means, the day-to-day realities of people of Gaza, and I do worry about this notion that somehow don't annex any further, as though that's not happening.
Yeah.
But it does matter that certain European governments have moved, and that those governments are speaking directly to the one country that matters and to help shift things. It moves slowly. It moves in a terrible pace. More people are suffering. People will suffer more. But again, I go back to statecraft. I go back to the Society of States. I go back to this is how states move as well. But it's also been shaped by the fact that there is electoral pressure that faces every single one of these leaders. It's very clear, but there's also the right-wing pressure point as well. So we shouldn't ignore the tension right now and the tussle between politics. I just want to go back to something that you said and connect it back to one question that you asked me at the beginning as well. That when I think about the years of crisis group, again, one thing that's different is that suddenly tariffs and trade have become conflict-inducing and tension-inducing as well. So to your point about security, the question I'm asking myself now is that how do I think about tariffs as a conflict prevention tool? Because if it goes wrongly, you can see a real tension now in the high seas of China, the South China Sea as well. We are living, to your point, Isander, we're living in a world of increasing protectionism and isolationism as well, and it's zero-sum as well. So tariffs has become, trade has become the tool as well of diplomacy in a very negative way as well. So suddenly I do have to think about those tools that I thought had nothing to do with the work that we do at Crisis Group, because I've seen that they are increasing the tensions between how states behave as well.
And I think part of what we have to be thinking about is that if this is the deep trend that is happening anyway, from globalization to regionalization and so on, there's a potential, I think, to also use it to our advantage, because rules are being formed at that level too. So I don't see it as a pure negative. I think what we have, the work that collectively we have to do is think about how do we turn it to our advantage. How do we turn for
just to jump in there, the trend towards protectionism, by the way, is new, of course. Like, we tend to associate the use of tariffs as a foreign policy cudgel with Trump for obvious reasons. But the world had been becoming more insular for many years now. And of course, even the Biden administration had protectionist instincts. But it is interesting to see that much of the world is, I think 72% of countries are still trading on most favored nation status. So, and many countries are working to strike free trade deals and working around the United States without the United States. That's another interesting trend to see. But Isander, I want to bring it back to something Comfort said, and hope you can build on it. This idea that, change is never immediate. For it to be lasting, it has to be built upon a bedrock of what the people want at some level. And so when you look at, the programs you run everywhere, what are the bigger trend lines that you are seeing in polls, in what young people want especially, and how does that determine the things you push for?
So I think there's been a general reckoning now for several years in our field that we were guilty to some extent of a kind of elitist, technocratic, agenda-setting kind of approach. Sure. And I think there's been a bit of a mea culpa. I think that speaks to what Benaifer spoke about earlier in terms of this question of social movements, how to engage with youth, and so on. But it also goes back to what Comfort said about the politics of it, and not just in democracies, also in places that aren't democratic, that popular demand, whether it's for economic security, whether it's because around questions of justice and moral indignation and so on, do matter. So I think the question to me is how, since we work chiefly with civil society, is how do we better equip civil society to think in that political way, and engage not from just a naming and shaming approach with governments, but trying to see what the openings are and the approaches are that get governments on their side on certain issues. Not on everything, obviously, but on certain issues, I think there is that opportunity. And we see that in a lot of different type of contexts. We see it in our work on drug policy. We see it very much a real desire for it on questions of economic justice, on our work on green industrial policy. For instance, and that's partly because governments do need to deliver something they do need to show some success, and as we move away from a neoliberal economic model, they're looking for the alternatives that are going to build prosperity for people. So bringing it back to those basics, the people want to be able to educate their children, to feed their children, to have prospects in their lives. And I think the other big realization that I think we've certainly made at OSF is that state capacity is really important. There's a lot of countries that have a real desire to show leadership. They don't always have the state capacity. So, and a lot of our work, we try working with civil society to help build that, because it takes expertise, it takes resources and so on.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, Janine. I'm going to give you the last word. Look, you've had this amazing career as a journalist and as a storyteller. Just tell us a little bit about how you think about how storytelling could shape some of these outcomes in the coming years.
I think the only way to relay, I mean, partially what we do at the Reckoning Project, we work in the courts of law, but we work in the courts of public opinion as well. So we use our very strong media to counter Kremlin propaganda, Israeli Hasbara, Hamas propaganda, because basically evidence, which is what we gather, doesn't lie. So you use it in that way, but it's increasingly harder to get the truth out there. I mean, there's so much that we have to wade through just to get the narrative. So what we do, and what I always have done in everything I've ever written, is use the human story. Because the human story is the most powerful one. And if you bring it to individuals, whether it's Darfur, Ukraine, Congo, Bangladesh, that is the one way that you get messaging across to a wider audience. And what we want is what Comfort said. We want people in the streets protesting nonviolently against what we see now as the dark powers and the crushing of international law, human rights, the media. But we want to do it in a proper way, without violence, and in a way that has true impact. And storytelling and the narrative is one way of doing that.
Indeed. Comfort, Janine, Isander, thank you so much.
Please welcome United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau of Africa, Ahuna Eziakonwa, King's College London Visiting Professor at the African Leadership Center, Dr. John Kayode Fayemi, and the Africa Center President and CEO, Ambassador Martin Kimani, for a conversation with journalist Stacey Samuel.
I'm with the very popular kids, as you can see, a lot of handshaking. I want to take this opportunity to say that, you know, today's discussion comes at a pivotal time when open societies face mounting authoritarianism, inequality, shrinking civic spaces. Yet Africa's leaders, institutions, and communities are showing the world what resilience and transformative vision can look like. So I'm honored to have this distinguished panel here to talk to us about governance, multilateralism, and Africa's global leadership coming from their deep experience. So good morning and welcome to you all. Ahuna, if I can start with you. You lead UNDP's engagement across 46 countries on the continent. From your perspective, how can Africa move from reacting to global decisions to more proactively shaping them in multilateral arenas such as the UN?
Thank you, Stacey, and just to thank also Foreign Policy and OSF for including UNDP in this conversation. Good morning, everyone. You know, apart from leading those 46 countries in UNDP, I am also African. And one of the things that has always laid heavily on my heart as an African is how much life and what Africa represents is undervalued on the continent and outside the continent. And I think when we start to talk about influence, the beginning of Africa starting to actually have a credible voice on the multilateral scene is with Africa starting to understand and embrace its own value and articulate it with confidence. And this has started to happen, Stacey. I was in Addis Ababa for the Africa Climate Summit, which was led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And he opened that summit by saying the following: in most of the COPs where Africa has featured, the conversation about Africa has always started on the basis of what Africa lacks rather than what Africa has. And he says we start to change that today by putting upfront the superpower of this continent, by starting to revalue our assets. And that's what's going to help Africa become more assertive with its voice and having more credibility. What are those assets? Everyone knows here about the youth that we talk about, and this is the one that UNDP has really anchored the change direction of development assistance, that we recognize that we have an emerging population of fiercely talented, but also conscientious young people who are innovative. Actually, we have the largest talented human capital in the world. And that is going to power the future in ways that no one can imagine, particularly crowding in technology. And so we think that for Africa's voice to be more credible and more influential, that voice needs to be diversified. It cannot just be about the leaders speaking. We have to leverage all the superpower on the continent, particularly its youth. And we are, as UNDP, advancing the influence and power of the youth at a global stage, for instance, at UNGA, by launching an initiative we call Timbuktu, and this is the largest initiative in the world to support the startup ecosystem on the continent of Africa. And we see young people who are producing ideas that can change the world, but we need to bend capital in their direction rather than just see them as a small initiative that we can do hackathon to hackathon, pitch to pitch, and have a feel-good drip development assistance. So I think that Africa's youth is going to power Africa's voice at the global and change the direction in terms of how the world sees the continent.
Thank you. Professor Fayemi, picking up on that point about, African agency and the power to move forward, you've worked extensively on constitutionalism and regional integration. How can this unity be fostered across the national, sub-regional, and continental priorities, as Ahuna has mentioned, with all these variables, so that the Agenda 2063 truly positions Africa in as a proactive global player? And for folks who don't know what Agenda 2063, people in this room will, but folks who are watching at home may not. So can you share a little bit about integration and how that might take place?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Foreign Policy and Open Society Foundations. To share what that agenda is, Africa 2063 really focuses on an integrated, prosperous, and culturally diverse Africa. That's what the continent aims to get out of that. But you cannot do that without going a little bit back in time. The order that is changing now, the post-Cold War 1945 order, was an order created without Africa. We were not at the table in 1945 UN. Maybe 2 African countries, Ethiopia and Liberia. And if you want to talk of global Africa, the bulk of the Caribbean were even still struggling for the vote at the time. So we weren't at the table. We were on the menu.
Fair point.
And it was the era of the scramble for Africa. If we go way back in time to 1885, you talk about integration. That was the period when the lines were drawn arbitrarily across Africa. communities, ethnicities were divided in Berlin. Again, we weren't there at the table. Post-independence, our leaders argued vociferously. Kwame Nkrumah led that argument that in order for Africa to really have its position recognized at the table, we need a united, integrated, prosperous continent. That's what we're still struggling to get. That's what Agenda 2063 is about. That's what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is about. But the devil is always in the detail. On United Nations reform, we have a consensus. There's a winning consensus as argued for if we must maintain the United Nations in its current form, where the Security Council dominates everything, then Africa needs at least 2 seats at the table.
And as Huna said, this table that is being prepared through integration today, building on its history, almost as it seems as though there's a bit of a renaissance in Pan-Africanism, but the folks that are ready to be at the table, right? It sounds like there's very much an a highly educated and ready, technologically ambitious population to do so.
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit, if you wouldn't, maybe just follow up.
It's not just that it's an ambitious population. Demography is also going to play a very critical role in this. If you look at the statistics, 2050, the 3rd largest country in the world would be Nigeria.
That's true.
After India and China.
Right.
The working population in the world would have more than a quarter from Africa. And right now, the growing working population, Africa dominates. Look at the median age, 19 in Africa, 38 in China, 38 in the United States. There's a huge struggle, and you're going to need these skilled workers. The extent to which we are able to organize ourselves collaboratively on the continent to take advantage of that autonomous space, that is what will make the difference for us on the continent.
So
that's what African leaders, I believe, are focusing on.
So you have set the stage for me to then ask you, Ambassador Kimani, understanding Africa's leverage, as our 2 other speakers have shared and laid the groundwork for. What is your perspective on strengthening this collective influence in a multilateral way in terms of negotiation? Because this, both with the UN, with trade, external to the continent.
Good morning. That's a really difficult question. I'll give it my best shot, but thank you for having me here. Everyone knows that we're living through a period of great instability globally in terms of geopolitical rivalry. And it's very difficult. In politics and geopolitics, everyone has an opinion, but no one knows what will happen. So it is wise to go back to certain starting points to understand where you are. Great events happened in 1945. One of them was the founding of the UN, which is being celebrated this year. I did not hear a single African leader celebrate the Pan-African Congress in Manchester in 1945. So earlier that year, the UN was signed into existence. And in the fall of that year, these delegates met in Manchester. And W.E.B. Du Bois, in his statement after this conference, noted, of course, that they were not at the table of the creation of the UN. Well, there were a few Africans. Haiti was there, Ethiopia, but otherwise, Africans were largely left out. And it was the energy of that Manchester conference and the activism and the writing and the thinking that led to it that got the leaders who were there, who became presidents and prime ministers, and then entered the UN, basically took the United Nations and transformed it into what it had never been intended to do. The United Nations was not a decolonization tool. Its founders did not imagine it to be a decolonization tool. But the people from the Pan-African Congress in Manchester used it that way. So where is the Manchester Conference of today? And who is an African leader? The people who were in Manchester were young. They were very audacious. They had a vision. Where are they? Do our leaders today embrace those principles from Manchester? And broadly speaking, the answer is no. Not because they're African, but leaders all over the world are not embracing that. There's forms of state capture, forms of mediocrity that are so deeply laid out in global leadership. So to talk about multilateralism is, to me, a hopeless hope. Multilateralism will not be re-energized by states and state leadership. Multilateralism will be re-energized by young people deciding that they have visions of the future that are collaborative, they're universal, they're Pan-Africanist. And to me, when we talk about the population, every single leader talks about Africa's population dynamics. And they all believe they can capture it. But they can't. Because the dynamism, the imagination, the ambition has essentially outpaced and outgrown the modern state structure that was left at independence. So the only hope for multilateralism from an African perspective is a very radical inclusion agenda that is driven from beneath. And there's so many serendipitous moments. For example, development aid has gone down.
Yes.
Development aid is being eliminated. The amounts of pressure that are about to be applied to the African state are immense, because the little check that used to come and offer some relief from your citizens' demands has been stopped. So my message here, if I just said it and left, would be that there are going to be continuous crises in Africa and globally. And the countries and governments that learn the fastest that they're not going to be in control, that they need to open up and understand that this moment is not one you're going to fiddle around. There's no police file. I used to work in the security services. That's not going to help. And the leaders who get that and who open up, who allow young people, not just a voice, but a seat at the table, who harness that imagination, they're going to succeed greatly. And then that may give a chance to multilateralism to be reborn, right? That's my view. And I think young Africans, just to finish, are essentially left out of so many of these conversations, right? I've been walking around Midtown. They're not here this week. But they're watching. They're watching and they're understanding what's going on. I myself learned such a huge lesson last year in Kenya, just watching what young Kenyans were looking to do. And I don't think they've stopped. I don't think they're done. And I don't think young Africans are done. And Africa is so lucky to have them, because the rest of the world doesn't have these kinds of young people in their numbers and in their ambition. So if we embrace that, then multilateralism has a chance.
Thank you. Yes. I think these are incredibly important points for all of us. And also it's encouraging to this young group that's coming up behind. But it also sets the groundwork and begs the question, Ahu, and I want to ask you, some of the most pressing structural challenges, as Martin has laid out, includes finance, resources, regional integration, as we've been talking about, that will obviously shape Africa's future resilience. Can we talk a little bit about debt distress? Because this is what, has to be contended with, and young people are inheriting, right, as they move toward integration. So as debt distress continues to undermine investment in some of the social sectors. What are some of the innovative financing approaches that can help protect some of these critical spending in health, education, social protection, and actually moving towards this vision for the future for the continent?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, is to acknowledge that the debt stock and debt situation is significant, and it is tragic in terms of the future that we want to see. And there are root causes, because every country that wants to develop has to at some point borrow money. So the fact that African countries take loans is nothing exceptional or unique to Africa. But the question is, at what cost? And that's one thing that we've been looking at in UNDP, the cost of capital. And it is definitely biased in terms of risk perceptions on the continent. We have African countries that are rated. I think 37 countries have a sovereign credit rating done, out of which only 2 have investment grade rating. And that has serious implications if you're mostly junk rating. So why is Africa not able to earn better rating that then means they can borrow at lower cost, like most countries? Risk perceptions, but also biases that feed into the methodology that rating agencies use. That's something that we have interrogated in UNDP. We released a report 2 years ago on the cost of capital. And what it showed is that 16 African countries that got rated lost at least $75 billion from this biased way of rating, non-objective way of rating. Methodologies that are so opaque. Nobody knows how rating agencies come up with this. Risk is rated, but resilience is not rated, nor Africa's assets and value part of that rating. So we're challenging that, and we have just deployed a program. There will be an Africa rating agency, credit rating agency launch, is already launched, also to provide additional data so that first of all, money can become cheaper on the market. More African countries are going to have to go to the market for money because they're also graduating away from least developed country status to middle income status, which means they're no longer eligible for concessional money, concessional loans. So money is going to become more expensive. Aid has dried up. So we need to create a fairer system of accessing capital than what we currently have. And I think the fact that Africa has to borrow even to tackle impact of climate change is atrocious. We need to make sure that climate finance, the discussions at the global level, take into consideration the fact that a continent that does not generate the highest amount of emissions that we're talking about is having to bear the burden of 70% burden of the impact of climate change, and yet it's not getting finance relief from it. So there are a number of aspects in the landscape that need to be mobilized. Africa generates a lot of resources because it loses close to $100 billion to illicit financial flows, which means Africa is able to generate that money, but it's not mobilizing it for its development. That's another, we call it domestic resource mobilization. The outflow of resources from the continent is tragic. And then you go back with a hat to borrow from outside. So all of these will need to be corrected. Leaders in Africa have a responsibility, as we also have leaders at the global level.
Thank you. This is a really important consideration. And I would like to shift, not too far, but to you, Professor Fayeme. Can we look at finance and the question of resources and development? You mentioned AFTA, which promises, obviously, industrialization and job creation, but success is going to require safeguards against extractive patterns. And what strategies can ensure that communities, not just external investors, benefit from this resource-led growth?
Thank you. Well, we always talk about resources, and yes, there are resources in Africa. We're a resource-rich country. 70% of cobalt, half of the gold in the world, 90% of the platinum. You have resources in Africa. But it's not just about the resources, it's the management, it's the resource governance. I used to be a minister of mines in Nigeria. And at the time I was a mining minister, we developed the African Mining Vision collectively, which privileges local industrialization over extraction. And if you look at these resources the way we've talked about it, if you have the bulk of something within your space, it gives you greater leverage, ideally, if you work together collaboratively, the way oil-rich countries in the early 70s worked to create OPEC. And it was the product of OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries, that they used in developing many of these countries against Western attack at the time. And yes, the world would talk to us about protectionism and free trade and all that. We know all of that is balderdash now in the way the Western world that promotes this has gone about it. So there is nothing preventing us on the continent from organizing ourselves to say, okay, China, you want our cobalt? Or the United States, you want our rare earth minerals? This is our ball, as a friend of mine would say. If you don't agree or subscribe to how we negotiate this in our overall best interest, we're taking our ball away. I think African leaders haven't done enough of that, even in implementing what is contained in the African Mining Vision and in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Internal trade amongst African countries is still abhorrently poor. We still trade more with outsiders than with ourselves. We don't engage in those opportunities that this autonomous space affords us. And I think in this geopolitical shift that we're witnessing, it's not about changing relations with the West with relations with China. One form of exploitation would not necessarily resolve the problem with another form of exploitation. It's how power relations are reordered that would determine how we respond to this. And that's where the citizens' pressure that Martin talked about is going to come in really effectively.
Ambassador Kimani, can we then connect Africa's place on the world stage with its relationship with global partners, picking up on what both Ahuna and Dr. Fayeme have said? One of the things actually I believe you have said is that Africa's diaspora has been described as a superpower of capital. Its expertise, its influence, despite the challenges. How can the continent reimagine external partnerships then with major powers to move beyond this resource extraction toward technology transfer, infrastructure, and more human capital investment?
Oh, wow. I think if you don't mind, I'll pick up from where
Please.
Ahuna on the issue of debt distress. And I can see what we're trying to do is essentially have a debt jubilee, which we had, some decades ago. And then there was the financial crash here, the central bank here and in the West reduced interest rates to zero. So you needed to lend a lot of money, cheap money, and off it flooded back to Africa. We choked on it, and now we're back looking for another debt jubilee. But I think, and it's important that issue, as Ahuna put it, is approached in a sober way and that supports African countries. We still need to question what I think is a productivity distress, right? That the debt we've accumulated has not led to the kind of growth and prosperity that would have made that debt payable. Whether the interest rates are higher than they should be, they should have been payable with a bump in our productivity. So at the Africa Center, we're very interested in inquiring about what the new way of work is going to be. There's hundreds of millions of Africans who are going to come into the job market. What kind of job market are they going to come into? Because it's being reshaped by technology. And one sentence that haunts me is that if it can be quantified, it will be automated. Yeah, and so we have a chance in Africa to think about the nature of our economies and the kinds of jobs that are going to be available to young people. The fact that we're in this kind of fiscal distress is in itself an opportunity if we really seize it, because it allows us to rethink and reimagine our economies and to rebuild them and train differently. And frankly, the whole world is in trouble, not just Africa. I like how countries think they're rich now, but everyone is in trouble. Every education system is not being equal to the moment in terms of the technological challenge before us. So Africa has an opportunity, I think, to lead the world when it comes to building workforces and economic products and economic relations for the AI age. And in that race, we are equal to everyone. It's not that you don't have to have huge AI companies to do it. You just need to figure out what should your education system be like, what should your incentives for work be like, what should your regulations be like, and I think we could thrive, right? So when it comes to how we will relate to major partners, the simple answer is that we are in the start of a new Cold War. And Africa simply needs to understand that it has to reform its peace and security architecture, which is intricate, it's well thought out. If we do it, and we're determined to do it, we will have the leverage to have real partnership with major powers. If not, we won't be.
On that note, I want to say thank you for your thoughtful insights on Africa's future. It's a hopeful one. Thank you.
Next, please welcome Open Society Foundation's Vice President of Programs, Dr. Pedro Abramovay, Working Families Party National Director, Maurice Mitchell, and Colombian Senator and Presidential Candidate, Maria Jose Pizarro, for a conversation with journalist Stacey Samuel.
A great conversation. I had to come back and have another one with another group of really distinguished panelists, and I thank you all. You know, we find ourselves, as we heard before, at a critical inflection point, especially as, you know, the international community has gathered here for the 80th UN General Assembly. Citizens across the globe are demanding more from their democracies beyond free trade and fair elections. They want governments that deliver inclusive governance, equitable public services, and socioeconomic justice. Yet at the same time, we see authoritarianism advancing globally, as we heard some of our previous panelists mention. Civic spaces are shrinking and inequalities are deepening. So we're fortunate to be joined by three extraordinary leaders who are each confronting these challenges from different vantage points. So thank you for being here. Pedro, let's begin with you. Your career has been dedicated to moving democracies beyond procedural elections and institutions toward the substantive way where everyday governance produces real results for the people in Brazil. What does it mean to move from a procedural to a substantive democracy? And what are the risks if governments stop short of electoral participation?
Yeah. Well, good morning, everyone. Such an honor to be in this panel with this amazing people that I admire so much. I think, first of all, when we are facing the challenges of democracy, right, and we are seeing right now so many authoritarian leaders that are challenging things that we thought were given in many of our countries, one of the issues that I think it provokes in all of us is that for democracies to work, right, and for democracies to really, especially in countries that are unequal, that have challenges that need to provide to people, democracy needs to be able to welcome change, right? Because if democracy only means maintaining the status quo, this will be and has no kind of escape route, right, for people who wants to change. Then it's not real democracy. It's people going to the ballots and voting. If things are just maintained, if you don't see democracy as a path to change, then we can't really call it democracy. Right. And so the challenge that we have right now is when we call people to defend democracy, many times we are seen as people that are calling people to defend the status quo, right? And the change is on the side of the people who are challenging the foundations of our systems. So I think what we need to understand is how we can connect to people, one, to show that democracies are able to provoke change, right? That democracies are a dispute not only to see what are the elites that are in place, but really how we can direct the public resources to make people's lives better, right? To really tackle the issues that affect the common life and the common workers and common people in different parts of the world.
So with that, you know, you've seen reforms in Brazil and elsewhere that tangibly have improved lives, from justice reform to service delivery. Can you share any of those examples where democracy has delivered in a way that the citizens, particularly in your country, could feel immediately?
Sure. I am clearly someone that, I was born when the country was a dictatorship. I saw, when I was a kid, a new constitution emerge. And I've seen my country, create a public universal health system. I've seen all the kids for the first time going to school, illiteracy reduced to almost zero, inequality drop, in a country that has still huge challenges. But the product of democracy, the changes that we saw in a country like Brazil that was completely transformed by democracy, is a good example, right, of what we can see. The challenges come when we think, well, change is only coming from authoritarian places, right? If you look at China and see, why can China, build a bridge in 6 months or build a hospital and democracies can't? And people immediately associate that, the issue is democracy itself, right? Authoritarians are able to do that. That's simply not true, right? This country and Europe, for example, were fully and important democracies in the post-war era, and were able, right, through the democratic process to provide, to have a strong state that was providing to people in a way and building transformation, right, completely transforming those countries through creating social networks in a way that was absolutely revolutionary. And so we need to recover that. The issue is not democracy itself. The issue is who are fighting for rights. Democracy was able to deliver in Europe and the US at those times because we had social movements that were fighting for rights, and they saw in the democratic process a pathway to really change. And I think that's what we need to reclaim, supporting the movements who are fighting for rights and offering them the democratic path for change.
I would love to pick up on your point on those pathways. Mechanisms that are participatory, like technology platforms, really have given voice to citizens. What evidence have you seen through the tools that you've worked with that have meaningfully shaped policy decisions, especially for youth in marginalized groups?
Yeah, I think there are many, right? I think, of course, and there was a moment in which we all thought the internet would be kind of a lot of optimism about the possibilities, right? And suddenly, of course, a lot of the discussion on social net, for example, in Brazil, when I was in government, we developed a collaborative process to develop a law that would democratically regulate the internet in the country. That was a huge success, right? It is much harder now because the polarization in the internet is completely different. Sure. But I think whenever we create the mechanism for people to engage in a way that is productive, right, that is not just around ideas, but talks to the actual life of people. And we are seeing that, the process of participation, of building new constitution, even the case of Bangladesh right now. You see a country that is completely polarized, with the ability of, through a participation process, the commissions and that, creating a new constitution that is pacifying the country, right? So we are still seeing in a lot of places of the world, democracy is the way to generate stability and to, create the path for progress. And we need to reclaim that as people really believe in democracy.
Thank you so much. I would like to give Senator Maria Jose Pizarro the opportunity to pick up on these themes. So I'm going to ask that everyone, unless your Spanish is fluent, mine is not, we have the benefit of translation, so you have earpieces here that you can use. Because, Senator, I would really like for you to have the opportunity to sort of pick up on this possibility of inclusive design and, the future of democracy as you see it, particularly as you're running for president of your country.
Bueno, un saludo a todas, a todos. Muy feliz.
Greeting to all of you. I am very happy to be here with all of you. I think that our generation comes from two different promises that have not been developed. It was the first was a Congress that was joined in a vibrant, and these two promises have not materialized yet. We need to be able to go from a democracy where simply people just participate in these elections, where they go, they elect, as Pedro said, the status quo. Not from that, but also the decisions that are being taken are taken in spaces where doors are closed, where people have no effect. People feel like they're completely outside of democracy and being able to participate. So I think we have these challenges that we need to be able to fix. So within this path, you have the two different phases of one is the market, and then we have this lack of democracy. We need to be able to have the discussions with the world, because if democracy is not fixed in the real world regarding housing, health, to be able to access a planet that they can cohabitate within the future, all of these are the worries that are surrounds the new generations, including the discussions that we've had in the past and the first outing that people have, including the young people. They are going to go to this leadership that are completely authoritarian, and they promise all of these things. They give people theories, but they have this confusion of information, and they don't have access to mechanisms that would allow us to think clearly and critical thinking within all of these organisms and all of these technologies that is also for the market and not for democracy and for the decision making of the people. And we need to be able to surpass this, because we now are going to continue working on democracy on this way, but we need to give it to people, provide more democracy for the people, to be able to have vibrant conversations and vibrant movements that people can feel that they are part of democracy and be able to fill this democracy with the content, because right now is an empty concept that we call democracy. And here, from Colombia, from the paradigm that we have shown, including this first progressive government. I don't know if you know this, but in 200 years is the first time in the life of our republic nation, progressive government. It's the one that reigns right now. We've been able to have the multilateral discussions like this one's, international discussions. We are addressing different things. First, we need to be able to make sure that economy works for the daily issues that people have. And in one way, we've gotten there. And I can show you and I can talk to you about changes in a country like Colombia that has been hit by violence with thousands and millions of people that have died and people that have disappeared. We have tripled the dictatorships. And from that reality, and with a country that is so biodiverse, we are talking about the need to have a discussion regarding the environment and the rights to have a life that we take care of. And third, a discussion, a dialogue that is regarding peace. If we want peace to be a reality that we can live with within our country, is a global discussion regarding the need to be able to transition to a different model, to be able to fight drug trafficking and the criminal structures that operate within our countries, but the orders are being given from Dubai, or from Albania, or from Mexico, or from day. We question this a little more, but we want to be able to transition from acquiring rights to be able to construct those opportunities that women, we can be part of the political climate, not also from inclusion, but also to have a world that is in peace, that our children can grow and be safe in places where they can grow safely. Not also regarding the environment, but also this implies that our government can have a dialogue that is clear, constant, and concise.
Gracias. For truly, thank you. Yes, it's worth acknowledging, how you see and envision democracy delivering on social justice, peace, gender equity. So thank you for that. Maurice, I'd like to turn to you, because in this conversation, you bring a perspective of social movements as well, from an outside formal institutions to reshaping them. While Senator Pizarro has described the guardrails, right, that are needed, how do you see youth-led gender justice and racial equity movements contributing to building durable, resilient democratic systems, and what kinds of support do they need to sustain that impact?
Okay, well, thank you, and it's an honor to be with you, Senator, and Pedro, and with you all. It's interesting, Pedro, you said that you were born in a dictatorship and you saw the process of going from dictatorship into a constitutional democracy. I was born in a constitutional democracy and I'm witnessing the devolution into dictatorship. So we should compare some notes. And to the framework that you talked about, right? Talking about the inclusion of women, talking about focusing on the environment. In some ways, that, in my response to your question, we have distinct issue areas and organizations and civil society organizations and sometimes identity-based groups and movements. And we need to build coalitions that don't basically have the lowest common denominator be we're aligned around competition inside the coalition between these identity-based groups or these issues, but rather these identity-based groups and issue areas, their purpose is to build enough power for the coalition to be bigger than its sum, right? And for that to happen, we need leadership that actually is aligned around a North Star. And so you could have a campaign that's about affordability, like Zohran Mamdani's campaign, one of Working Families Party's candidates. You clap for that. That on its face is about affordability. In fact, it's about like three things: free buses, childcare, and a rent freeze, right? But its expression is about a multiracial, cross-gender, aspirational solidarity movement, right? And so what I think is interesting about that is that you could create a through line from a set of policies that are legible, understandable, translatable across many, many different people to the various interest groups. Like I was on the ground with him campaigning in a few days before the primary, and I was inundated by a bunch of Bengali uncles, right? And then that same day, I went to the heart of Black Brooklyn, and it was like if Jay-Z had hit the streets with the excitement around Zoran, right? And so I saw in that campaign the expression of a politics that is accessible to all of those groups that have distinct interests, right? And so, which is very different from, I think, what I've seen with the Democratic Party, which has been to basically equally annoy distinct interest groups and identity groups. And basically the message has been, you know, wait in line, lower your gaze, aspire for less, and we'll defeat the fascist. And I think that message is one of the reasons why 90 million people didn't show up in November. We have to create a politics that creates a direct line between the material needs, right, of affordability, which is an experience of most working class people around the world, but also the spiritual needs that most people have to be connected to something that is aspirational. And that, at its best, is what politics can be. It could be a connection between the material and the spiritual. And ironically, the right wing often does a better job of articulating those types of politics, because we're left with, you know, you talked about the procedure, we're left with the people who tend to be the ones, the parties that lead the pro-democracy movements, being sort of neoliberal parties that are focused on procedure and focused on process, and not necessarily focused on creating a politics that is embodied and experienced and felt. So to answer your question, if we want to defeat the global far right, we need to redefine what democracy is. We need to have a different set of definitions, and it can't be, you know, a laundry list of metrics that is hollow in the lives of everyday people.
Fair, thank you. We don't have too much time, but I'd love to, you know, maybe follow up. If you were then to offer, you know, guidance or maybe one thought to each citizen everywhere that demanded democracy not just exist, but to deliver, what is the single most important reform or principle you'd put forward? Here in the United States, we have a particular challenge, but not dissimilar to other countries. So, Maurice, do you want to sort of take that as what is your most important reform?
Well, you know, the United States is a very particular place, right? And so one of the things that, you know, the Working Families Party, we're an independent party. What we're attempting to do is to build the appetite for a multi-party, multiracial democracy in this country. To me, parties are an essential building block of democracy. Sometimes people try to circumvent parties and focus on either candidate-centric or voter-centric reforms. But the reason why parties are really important is that parties create a venue for people to build power together. And strong parties and the ability of strong parties to be in coalition, it's not a panacea, because there's plenty of places that have parliamentary democracies with coalitions that, you know, have troubles. But one of the reasons why we've fallen so far off the deep end so quickly in the United States has been this focus on, again, the proceduralism, right? And so most people in the United States do not believe that they're in a vibrant democracy. And in the same way that simply because there are competitive elections and you could vote doesn't mean you're a participant versus a subject in your democracy, any more than simply because you could go to a grocery store and purchase yogurt doesn't mean you're on the board of directors of the company that sells you the yogurt, right? And people understand that. And so, to me, reforms that help organizing, and then also outside of the political sphere, I think labor organizing, which has been attacked over the past 50 years in this country. You know, most people live their lives in their jobs, and democracy also is participation as a worker in making decisions and being able to organize there. And so I think those reforms, both strong parties organizing and labor reforms for worker power is essential.
Thank you. Pedro, I see you shaking your head because I know you have, faced many of these similar challenges. What would you say are some of the most important reforms and principles that you put forward?
I think it's less a reform in law and much more a reform in the way we look at politics, right? Politics should be the space, democracy and politics should be the space that we understand that our shared destiny depends on the other, right? We have a community and we need, our destiny depends on engaging with the community to build a better life for everyone, right? Once democracy is about that, once we can allow people to dream while they go to the ballots, while they engage in the process, as we're seeing, for example, in New York, but as we see in many parts, right, when people go to the streets, if we can offer them that possibility and make democracy about the way to really transform their lives, it will completely transform our ability to protect democracy in themselves. If we don't, right, if we just think that democracy is the most kind of boring and something that can transform people's lives, I think we'll have failed. And I think it's very important. Maurice touched on a point that I think is very important, which is this idea that identity politics, right, is only about the individual, is exclusionary, right? This is an idea that was invented from the outside. The movements themselves, they're always about the quality of life, the affordability, right? Women's movements were about care economy, were about transforming people's lives. Black movement, Afro-American movement, Afro-Brazilian movement were always about affordability, was about how to engage people in the economy. Separating those things is not in the interest of those movements, and it wasn't created by those movements. So I think this idea of, as Maurice said, to reconnect people on the common collective dream that we can have as a community is part of the challenge to rebuild democracy.
Senator, is there something you would like to leave and impart with our audience as we think about reform and the reform necessary to promote democracy globally, but in countries like Colombia as well?
As I said, our government has taken some steps forward. We have initiated an agriculture reform that is fundamental in our countries where people don't own the land. The fact that the workers of the land can be the owners, and it is also prioritizing women to be able in the 21st century can be owners of this land. This is something extremely changing life because it can allow them to connect and to cross that border to be productive. Somebody that's productive, someone that is productive can better their environment and also the quality of their life. So in countries like ours, we need reforms like educational reform. Why? Because we are facing the challenges of technology. What can happen in the middle of this technological innovation? We have contingencies of huge groups of people that are marginalized because they are not able to use technology. It's not also about political participation, but it's also because technology can be a tool that can better their lives. If people are not able to have access, universal access, if I can say it in this manner, to the benefits of these technological challenges, we're going to have a dystopic population and these people will be marginalized because of inequality, poverty, the destruction of their environment, thousands of migrants leaving their land, not also because of the economic issues, but also because of the environment. More of them will continue coming, and they will continue coming here because, in theory, these countries on this side of the world they think they have access to a life that they cannot have within their land. So we need to be able to advance to inclusion, and we need to modernize the governments in our countries. Today, democracy and the institutions and the governments for our people are obstacles, complete obstacles, to go and to be able to go to this state is something crucial that they cannot access. If we make this accessible, people are going to feel that that state is functioning for them, that there is a government that is transparent, and that people can incorporate themselves to exercise democracy.
Inclusion. And I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. Thank you for
sharing. Thank you. And now, please welcome to the stage International Peace Institute President, His Royal Highness Prince Zayed Rad Al Hussein, for a conversation with FP's Ravi Agrawal.
Hi, everyone. When I was thinking about who could say a few words today that would inspire us and make sense of everything, I could not think of a better person than Prince Zayed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So, such a big topic we're here to talk about, protecting humanity, defending human rights. And when we were sitting outside, you said something that really caught my ears, and I wanted to hear more, but I said, no, let's say it on stage. You said, it's not actually that hard.
No. Well, first of all, Ravi, I'm delighted to be here and to see so many friends in the audience. It feels almost like being with family, and since we'll all be future prison mates at some stage, it's good that we join up early on. No, it's not so hard. Honestly, it's not so hard. In all our experiences, and I think for many, I can speak for many, and I hope I can speak for Benaifa and everyone at OSF. We all know you put the right person in the right position at the right time, and miracles can happen. You can have the best processes, the best funded projects and programs, and you put the wrong people, no matter how hard you try, it's not going to work. And so the whole thing is actually at the highest levels, having the right people in the right position. And then magically things start to happen. And you don't have to go far in history to see that that's the case. So all of this sort of, gymnastics over do we need to change the charter, do the UN, what's happening to multilateralism? It's actually quite simple, and it's amazing. You just have to look a little bit deeper than normal, and you realize some very obvious things that should be there are not there. And it's just a matter of understanding that, I think.
And how do you get those things that aren't there? When you look at history, this moment we often use the word unprecedented. It feels like there have been so many slippages in basic rights around the world. What gives you hope? What are you looking to in history or in the current moment that could lead to some of the changes, some of the magic you're describing?
Well, the leadership is surprisingly very democratic. It's really quite amazing. And the more you work in the international system, the more you realize this. A good idea doesn't have to come from someone with well-heeled credentials in a senior post. A good idea can come from anyone. It's very democratic. But the ones with good ideas are few and far between. I've spent 5 years teaching at a prominent law school. All the students are really very good. They had to get good LSAT scores to be there, right? They're smart. But I can count on the fingers of one hand those that are truly exceptional, truly rare. It's not everyone. It's not everyone who can really think originally, who can move in and out of different fields very easily, glide in one, come out of the other, see things. And the thing is, we assume everyone is equally gifted, and unfortunately it's not the case. But the ideas are democratic in that sense. And so if we have someone with a good idea, we surround them, we try and support them, we give them space. We don't claim their work, it's their work, but we try and give it oxygen and move them into the right space. And we don't fight over it. Yesterday I asked this question. We had a a program on women, peace and security. And I said the very obvious question, who's leading this movement? If it's everyone, it's no one. Right? And if there are leaders, who are they? And how are they coordinating all of this in different spaces? And why are we not talking about this? And why can't we say, you know, for the good of the whole, I'm prepared to surrender a little bit of personal agency, a little bit of my own empowerment, and I'm going to put it in this direction of people who really can make things happen. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't take anything away from me to do that. But we find it so hard in the progressive movement to surrender agency that we fought so hard to have. But it works against us after a while. Right? And we're sort of this all over the place, and we're not sure, and why can't we just speak straight? I had a very prominent rights person speaking on stage, and not once could she mention Gaza, not once. You're like, come on. I mean, what are we thinking here?
You know, so many of the things you say ring true, but you make it all sound so easy. I mean, when you were the UN Human Rights Commissioner, I remember you could have run for a second term. You chose not to, and you devolved power, basically. You gave up power. You sacrificed. Not everyone can do that. I mean, how do you think about that as a way to further better outcomes?
No, I mean, look, there was no way I was going to be re-elected. and I honestly, I don't think any High Commissioner should put themselves in a position where they are re-elected, because then I don't think they're doing their job. I don't want to talk about the incumbent or the predecessor, but I always felt that you need a little bit of edge when you speak. If it's too alluvial, too rounded, too smooth, you know, you might say the point, but you're not making, you know, I raised this yesterday. I found it funny that when I was in that job and we would take decisions as an office and we'd try and be very strategic, the way I was attacked in the press in the Arab world was that I was sort of this man who was an effete, who was sensitive to the feelings of others, and somehow I was weak, or I had
As if any of those are bad things.
Well, that's the point. But they were all scared of me, right? And I knew they were scared of me because they didn't want me to visit their countries. Or when I did, they would be all, you know, clammy palms and sweating, but you had their attention. You had their attention, and they knew you could go to the press. What we didn't have, and we still don't have, is a way to connect all of that to capital formation, to, in a deeper sense, when the opposition is being undermined and squashed and destroyed, then how do you think of clever workarounds? And we need that, but we need lots of partners to do that. But it's not rocket science.
You know, the thing you just said about losing one's edge if you give up moral power, moral clarity and legitimacy, I think that will stay with everyone in this room, certainly with me. We've been talking about rules a lot today and international law and the erosion of, you know, basic principles that we had begun to take for granted. When you look around the world and you see that, what is your advice to communities, to leaders, to countries to forge and uphold the rules that already exist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, we're to put it bluntly, we're heading to some form of anarchy if we're not careful. And in my institute, we're trying to put a program together and bring about 13, 14, maybe more senior military commanders to talk about IHL and distinction. I served in the military. It was the Desert Police in Jordan, the successor of the Arab Legion, for 5 years. I did not join thinking that I am a mercenary, in effect, that will just do the bidding of the state unquestionably. If a soldier is not aware, or the commanding officer is not aware of distinction, a clear distinction, and if you're in doubt, you don't go. If it's an orange light, you don't do it. right? Jus in bello. You don't do it. And what's happening, and what's been happening ever since 9/11, and we probably in earlier times, certainly Vietnam, but then there was a period where we hoped it was improving, is that the distinction is fading at such a rapid clip, and what we determined to be a military advantage gained is expanding, that in effect what you'll have is soldiers basically becoming murderers. Murderers. There's no distinction. And we are moving into sort of, as many have probably said, absolute forms of warfare. And the rules don't apply. So we'll have these spheres of influence again. And where in the crease of where these new empires meet, we're going to find immense turmoil and suffering. And then the rules there at the margins, if they don't apply, they'll create a general corrosion, of course, around the world.
So if you can take us from there, I know you're a very hopeful person. Like deep down, you somehow manage to have a lot of hope and strength and resilience. How do you see hope in what you've just described? What comes next?
So, I mean, to me, it's sort of fairly basic how we do this. Right? The worst state to be in is a low energy state where you just give up. You feel that it's hopeless. You live for the moment because, as we were saying at dinner yesterday, you live for the moment because the future is going to be so bad that just live it up, basically. The best state, obviously, is if you have high positive energy and a convergence on critical issues and a desire to get things done. The second best state is a negative energy state, right? But accompanied by ideas, real ideas. Because if you people are nervous and distressed, you can bottle it and use it, but you've got to be able to know where you're going, and the ideas have to be there. And you can move it and shape it into something that is unexpected. But you don't want to distress people without having those ideas come to the fore. And I think that's how I would see this. But again, you have to put the right person in the right position for it to happen. You know, the UN has lost its peacemaking function. Everyone sees it. And there's this wonderful book by Dr. Thant Mint U. I urge all of you to read it, about U Thant. I mean, quite incredible what a Secretary General who was formerly an ambassador and before that a school teacher was able to do. And most people's understanding of the Cuban Missile Crisis is warped. And you read the book and you get a better understanding for it. But it's that sort of thing. Whoever the next Secretary General it is, and surely it must be a she, right, or they.
Yes.
They need to be gifted. They need to be able to do that particular job really well. Don't put your name forward if you don't think you can do it, or you don't think you can withstand the pressure. It's not a prestige thing to turn up in a post and be manifestly incapable of doing it. Right?
We're out of time, I'm afraid, but I wish everyone saw the world. I wish everyone saw the world as you did. Ladies and gentlemen, Prince Zaid.
Thank you.
It is left to me just to say a few closing remarks. How can you not be more hopeful when you hear someone like Prince Zaid? How can you not be a little bit more hopeful when you hear any of the speakers who were up here before us? And for those of you watching on live stream around the world, I wish you could see the energy in this room and the people who are in this room. I mean, I recognize and know so many of you, and I admire the work you do and the way you fight for the causes you believe in and fight for the principles and the morals that are imperiled in this moment. And yet you see glimmers of hope and embers of hope and courage in the work that so many of you are doing all over the world. We've had some fantastic conversations here today. Benaifer kicked things off for us with, I thought, some very powerful remarks about the importance of building from within, from the ground up, of trusting communities and the wisdom that they have for themselves, for their own solutions, to look within their histories, and then to learn and adapt from the expertise in rooms like this, but expertise imparted not just top down, but in a very collaborative way. Benaifer, that really stayed with me. Thank you for putting it as you did. So many other great discussions about the importance of rules, but also how to uphold them, the importance of the tools that we have with which to force powerful actors to be accountable, the importance of storytelling, Janine's work in that space of not just naming and shaming, but of showing alternate futures, of showing ways with which communities can build towards better outcomes. Those are the stories that stay with me. Those are the lessons, just some of the lessons that I take with me from a conversation, a set of conversations like the ones we've had today. I just want to end by saying I really want to thank OSF, Open Society Foundations, Benaifer and her team, so many of you sitting here, and your teams around the world, and the work that you do. It is under attack, and yet it is so important for so many different communities, sectors that rely on your support, your strength, your will, your actions, your expertise. I thank you for that. And there are groups around the world, and indeed in this room, that really thank you for that. Let's just have a round of applause for them. It's hard work, it's challenging work. You need real courage to do what they're doing, and it's in moments like these that you truly appreciate the people who stand up. I started off by saying I'm a salesman, so I guess I must end with one last sell. Thank you all for being here, but right outside we have these caps that I'm very fond of, and they're soft power caps. Soft power, by the way, in a discussion that has included a lot of hard power elements, soft power is really, really important. It is a term that was coined in Foreign Policy magazine by the great Joe Nye, who then went on to write a book about it based on his essay in Foreign Policy. So we have foreign policy caps outside. I urge you to go grab one, wear it. In a world in which there are so many problems and soft power is being eroded left, right, and center, I think we need to bring it back. It is also something that feels very democratic, soft power. You can't just steal it. You have to earn it. And I feel like, when I wear that cap, I feel like it's my way of resisting, in a sense, to things that I feel like resisting to. There's a catch, however. If you're, I told you I'm a salesman. If you're a subscriber, you can grab one for free. Corinne Osna's sitting there. We'll check. If you're not, if you're not an FP subscriber, you'll need to cough up for a subscription, and then you get this cap. You also get an amazing subscription to Foreign Policy magazine, and I know many of you are subscribers, so let's go find out. Let's mingle and chat. Thank you once again for coming here. Thank you, OSF.